Fraser, I think we're...
Disculpe,
Matías,
tengo también otra pregunta.
calma, vamos a comenzar la exposición y al final vamos a volver a preguntar, ¿ya?
Sí, profe, disculpe,
No se
disculpe
preocupe.
que estoy muy emocionado.
Ya, bien,
Gracias, Matías.
sí. Roberto, ¿quieres dar el inicio?
Sí, bueno, agradecer esta instancia que ha organizado el profesor Luis Saavedra para que los estudiantes, sobre todo del área del dibujo, tengan una aproximación como nos gusta a nosotros con la industria, con quienes han estado participando y participan constantemente de lo que es el proceso creativo en la animación. Y para eso tenemos un excelente invitado, estamos muy agradecidos de Fraser, que con mucho cariño y mucha dedicación quiere hacer esta masterclass en la idea de entender, aprender, comprender cómo es la industria, la alta industria, digamos. Nosotros acá en Chile tenemos industria, pero para que se genere una industria real hay que tener mucha producción y mucho consumo también. Hemos tenido éxitos en Chile con la animación, tanto en cortometraje, con el Oscar de El Oso, o algunas animaciones que han llegado también a los Oscars. Y nosotros, como una escuela de región de animación digital, hemos también tenido nuestros propios éxitos. Y yo creo que el más importante es el que exalumnos nuestros estén participando de la industria de la animación, teniendo alumnos en Canadá y casos emblemáticos de alumnos que están trabajando en Sony en este momento. Así que estamos muy contentos por eso. Y parte del éxito y parte de este círculo virtuoso es que tengamos invitados del nivel que tenemos hoy día con Fraser. Así que muy agradecido, Fraser, de esta experiencia que vamos a tener. Muchas gracias al profesor Luis y ojalá que los estudiantes, tanto en la sala como de manera virtual, lo disfruten mucho. Un abrazo grande.
Gracias, Roberto. Entonces, ¿empezamos, sí?
Ya, showtime.
Ok, so, para empezar, un poquito de Roger. Okay, some reason Roger doesn't want to play with us, so hold on a second until I...
Go, baby Herman.
Yeah, let's see if I can get this to work a different way. Yeah, okay, try again. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this part of the presentation is I'm going to use Keynote, and because of the user interface on my iMac, when Keynote is running and I'm going through everything, I cannot see if you put your hand up, I cannot see if you put something in the chat as a question. So I will ask Luis to warn me if I need to stop or go back or stop presenting. But while I'm presenting in Keynote, I can't see the rest of the Google Meets display. So I'm not ignoring you if you add any messages or reactions. It's just that it's not visible to me on my screen because I only have one screen. Okay, so here we go on another share. Are you able to see the image of me in Keynote?
Sí. Sí.
And you can see the caption?
Yeah, it's coming in. Yeah, good.
Okay.
Great.
And hopefully we may even get a little bit of movement. Yeah?
It's moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to join you. and I do hope at some point I get the chance to come down and see you in person in Chile. I've never been that far south on the planet, so it would be a great opportunity, a great adventure. To begin with, what I want to do is talk a little bit about how I wound up working in the industry in the first place. So, do any of you recognize this painting? It's by a Spanish painter called Diego Velázquez. And this painting is owned by the National Fine Art Collection in Edinburgh in Scotland, which is the city that I grew up in. And I was very lucky. My father was a journalist. My mother was a primary school teacher, and they were perfectly happy for me to be interested in art. And they used to encourage me to go to all the galleries, and I had the opportunity also to go to the theatre, to listen to concerts. Edinburgh was a wonderful place with an international arts festival that ran for several weeks each year. And I would stand in front of this painting for a very, very long time when I was a kid. But like a lot of children in an art gallery, I didn't really pay that much attention to the information next to the painting. But when I was 14 years old, I went into the gallery and I went to the room where this painting hangs. And I stood in front of it and I noticed that it said Diego Velázquez, born 1599. And this painting, The Old Woman Cooking Eggs, was painted in 1618. And I did the arithmetic and I thought, oh my God, he did this when he was 19 years old. I only have 5 years left to try and get this good at drawing and painting. So the connections between art and animation are very important and very profound. Or you might say that it's kind of a narrative of how Diego Velázquez helped me to get hired by Disney. So this is the gallery itself in the centre of Edinburgh in Scotland. And these are the rooms where the paintings are on display. Usually, Diego Velázquez, Old Woman Cooking Eggs, would be in the position where the painting is with the three women, but they've moved it around over the years. So when I was 18, I had the chance to go to the art school in Glasgow, and we got to draw every day. It was a 4-year course. And in the first year, we did lots and lots of figure drawing. We had the opportunity to learn to paint, to sculpt in clay, to do printmaking, ceramics. But the backbone of everything that we did, the foundation stone of everything, was observational drawing, which suited me very, very well, because from childhood, I really loved to sit with a pencil or with colored felt tip pens or paints and make images. So these are from my first year during the 1980s, or 79 to 80, when I was 18, 19 years old. There's no photography used in reference for any of these. These are all from life, from observation. And in the first year, doing work in this style using these classical techniques, and I wanted to learn how to draw like Michelangelo. I wanted to learn how to draw like Raphael. I wanted to learn how to draw like Kathy Kollwitz. I wanted to know how to draw, but I wasn't trying to develop a particular look or style or technique. I just wanted to know perspective, anatomy, composition, lighting. And the best way of learning that is just to draw every single day. So I would draw and draw as much as I could. And in the first year, that was fine. But in the second, third, and fourth years, we had to specialize. And we had to choose a department. And I chose to study graphic design. And the tutors in the graphic design department, who were there to help us develop skills in illustration and photography and all kinds of other things, absolutely hated my drawing because it was boring. It was old-fashioned. It was too traditional. It was too classical. And they kept telling me, You need to do something cool. You need to develop a style. Nobody does this anymore. Nobody cares about this anymore. You should be doing something that has an identity to it. And I tried, and all the efforts that I made to be cool and happening and contemporary were a disaster. It never looked right. So eventually I moved over to doing work on videotape because the art school had purchased what by 1980 standards was portable video cameras. And we had a studio in the graphic design department, a photography studio where I could build sets and put up lights, and I could create little videos with the help from my friends. And I kept on drawing and painting in my spare time in the style that I was learning, from all of the Renaissance masters. But I didn't show the drawings to the tutors because they always got angry whenever I showed them the drawings. So this beautiful, beautiful building, it breaks my heart to show you this photograph, because the people who managed the art school after I left were much more interested in conceptual art. So they stopped being interested in observation. They stopped being interested in traditional skills. And I have no problem whatsoever with experimental art, with the Turner Prize, with people putting a dead shark in an art gallery. That's fine. Where I have a problem is when those people say everything that came before us must die. We must wipe off the surface of the earth any trace of old styles of art or old techniques. I think it's healthier if we can get things to coexist. But because I was at art school as I describe it, I was there in the years between the video for Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody and the opening of MTV, which was the first 24-hour cable channel dedicated solely to music video. I became the first ever student at the Glasgow School of Art to include a screen, a monitor, a television in my degree show submission. It was the first time ever. And of course, today, when you go to an art school anywhere in the world, you're surrounded by screens. It's very rare to see paper or canvas. Everything has become digital. But this was me at the age of 22, the week of my graduation from the art school in Glasgow. And little did I know, I was making a kind of history. But in all the time since I left there in 1983, they have never invited me back because I went over to what they consider to be the dark side. I went over to work in popular culture and in the commercial sphere. So my final year dissertation was also about the impact of electronic music on contemporary pop music. I was very interested in all aspects of technology and in all of the developments that were happening at that time in all different areas of the arts. And I would encourage you not to focus all your energy and attention on animation. Animation sits in an important position, surrounded and supported by all of these other art forms. And it's essential that you maintain a healthy interest across that entire spectrum. So when I finished my studies at the art school, I signed up for what was called the Scottish Film Training Trust. And the trades unions that controlled all of the communication industries like the print industry, journalism, publishing, television, film, theater, these unions were very powerful, and they had what was called a closed shop. So you couldn't get the experience without a union card. You couldn't get a union card without the experience. But through this scheme, which was sanctioned by the union, I learned how to be a film and sound editor on 16mm and 35mm film. And these are photographs taken in the cutting room at Sands Films in London, where from 1985 to 1987, I ran the cutting room and did all of the track laying of all the audio and sound effects for 2 3-hour movies, for 6 hours of cinema screen time on a movie adapted from a novel by Charles Dickens called Little Dorrit. So my entry into the industry was through learning how to be a technician. because it wasn't possible to train to be a production designer or an art director or a set dresser. Those were not opportunities that were open to me. And I thought at the time I would have to just bury my interest in drawing and designing. And after the first project that I worked on in London was released, I wrote to countless companies, and each week I would go into the center of London and buy this magazine, Screen International, looking for opportunities to move to another company and do more film editing. And then one morning, there was a picture in Screen International of Mickey Mouse. And there was an advertisement saying, Walt Disney Animation requires exceptionally talented animation personnel to work in London on a major full-length live-action animation feature. Now, I didn't send any of my artwork, but I did send them a letter. And the reason I didn't send my artwork was I had no animation experience. Also, if you remember, my tutors in my graphic design course hated my drawings. And I thought anybody out there in the commercial world would probably hate my drawings too. So I wrote them a letter and I didn't hear anything. But I noticed that they had an address. So I took the bus up to the address in Camden, and I went into the security guard and I said, what is the phone number for the Disney studios that are here in this building? And I went back to my apartment and I called, and I was put through to Don Hahn, who went on to produce Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. And I said, you know, I wrote to you and you didn't write back. And he got my letter out of the trash. And he came back to the phone and he said, well, we didn't write back because you wanted a job in the cutting room. And we don't need anybody in the cutting room. And then he turned the page to my resume and he said, wait a minute, you spent 4 years at the art school in Glasgow. Can you draw? So 2 hours after that conversation, all the drawings that my tutors told me were so terrible got me hired by Disney. And this is my first ever contract from July 1987 to start as a special effects in-betweener on £186 a week. And if I didn't screw up in the first 4 weeks, they'd keep me on and they'd pay me £200 a week, which was more than I had ever earned in my career in film editing at that stage. So this was a real corner for me to turn. So I didn't design the cow with the lipstick. I am not a character animator, so I didn't animate the cow with the lipstick. I was a trainee special effects in-between artist on the shadows on and around and below the cow with the lipstick. So this was the first scene I ever worked on as a trainee in-betweener. This was my first day in the animation industry. And this is the team of people that I joined when I went to Camden, a really extraordinary group of people who, level by level, drawing by drawing, added all of the lighting and shading effects that made the cartoon characters look three-dimensional. And the guy with his arms folded at the front is Chris Knott, who invented the technique. And when they accepted the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, the team from Industrial Light and Magic just forgot to mention all of the people in this picture, forgot to credit Chris Knott, who had invented the system that they had then done the compositing on, and Chris's name was never even mentioned in the citation for the Academy Award. So please remember his name, Chris Knott. The reason that the movie looks so amazing is because of his genius, and he is a very much neglected figure. So we got to meet this guy, and we all got an autographed photograph from Steven Spielberg. So I'm still, if you can believe me, I'm still in touch with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the people. I'm not in touch with Steven Spielberg. You don't care about Steven Spielberg. You're interested in that guy. So that's me at the age of 26 as part of the, this is about a third of the effects crew. There wasn't room in every photograph for everybody. So you can see these tall shelves. These are the scene stackers that we put all of our drawings in back in the day. So that's me at the age of 26 in 1987, standing next to the most famous filmmaker in the world. we didn't know when we were making the movie if it was going to be successful. There was a high possibility that it would be a great big disaster, like movies like Howard the Duck, or it could have been a terrible failure. But it was a gigantic around the world phenomenon. And it led to everybody who used animation to sell their products on television wanting their television commercials to look like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So we did an enormous amount of work on television commercials that used this same technique. So what I'm going to do now is pause, because I have some artwork from one of these television commercials that I can use to explain the technique we used on Roger Rabbit. And I'm going to share with you one of the commercials that we worked on for breakfast cereal, which is also based on one of the scenes in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, called the Dum Dum Bullets scene. And this is for a breakfast cereal called Weetabix.
Let's get him, boys.
Sure, boss.
Weetabix. Now, they had their Weetabix.
Those dirty rats. I guess I'll give it a miss.
Home time.
Say, have you had your Weetabix?
So I have to break it to you now. The reality of my working life has involved many more commercials for toilet cleaner, kitchen freshener, breakfast cereal, Count Chocula, Rice Krispies, Zucaritos, you name it. I've animated the shadows on dancing cornflakes. If anybody that thinks that I've spent my whole career in Hollywood, you are so wrong. I spent a lot of time over a fish and chip shop in Paddington adding special effects levels to commercials exactly like that. So what did we do on Roger Rabbit that was so different and so revolutionary? Well, if you remember movies like Mary Poppins, when the real actors interact with the cartoon characters, they step into a parallel world. So in Mary Poppins, they jump into a chalk painting on the sidewalk that the chimney sweep has created. And what they used to do is, as soon as the real people arrived in the parallel universe, magically they would change into brightly colored costumes, and they would also be very heavily lit. So the idea was to make the real people look like flat cartoon characters rather than to make the flat cartoon characters look like real people. And they would also keep the camera very still or motionless, or move it only a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, because otherwise the perspective that you need to capture and follow changes on every single frame, 24 frames a second. But when Robert Zemeckis came to London to meet with the animation director, Richard Williams, he said, "Oh, I've done my homework. I know that we've got to follow all of these rules and regulations when we combine cartoons and real people." And Dick Williams said, "No, don't you dare. You're famous for moving the camera around. You move the camera as much as you like, and we'll find a way of getting it all to match." So each day we would work with the scene that we were busy with, and we would work over large black and white photographic enlargements of every individual frame. And we would begin by tracing off the perspective of the room or the furniture or the street. And our job, one level at a time, one frame at a time, 24 frames a second for every single character, sometimes between 3 and up to 7 levels of effects artwork on top of the character line artwork, was to add shading and lighting that would make these characters look solid. This work was done on this particular scene by an animator called Kevin Davis. This was done, the lead animator on this was Christopher Jenkins. I was the assistant animator, and we had a team of assistants and in-betweeners in the effects department and simply adding the shadows. This is the diagram that I made to show the assistants and the in-betweeners how these shadows would move around Roger Rabbit and also below him onto the box, because he's not there, so he's not casting a shadow. So we had to match the movement of the shading frame by frame on the exposure sheet from the live action, because this is a long, uninterrupted scene with no edits. There's even a YouTube piece called Bump the Lamp, all about how much effort and work went into this because the source of light is swinging. And adding these effects levels took ourselves and this team of people between 5 and 6 weeks just for this one scene. So, how does this work? What would arrive on our desk in the morning would be simple line artwork, such as this drawing. These 3 characters are based on actors who played gangsters. So the actor on the left is Peter Lorre, the one in the middle is Edward G. Robinson, and the one on the right is Jimmy Cagney. Our job was to look at the live action footage and say, okay, behind the coffee machine, there is a bright light that is golden. And we would then have to imagine this was a 3-dimensional figure and shade the figure so that we left a light area to the left, and we would turn that into a closed line matte. This is almost actual size if you're looking at this on a computer monitor. It's 15 field papers, 15 inches wide. Then there's a second light source to the right. So the center of the character is darker. So we need to add darkness in the middle to fill out the volume of the character. That's a second matte level. And then to represent the window light, we have to create a third area of light. And we have to define and draw and create this and then allow it to be traced and painted onto cell. 3 layers, every single frame, 24 frames per character, plus all the vapor trails and all the cast shadows. So this was intensely labor-intensive work. But that is how these characters look 3-dimensional in anything that uses the Roger Rabbit technique. And of course, today we have virtual toolkits in the digital environment that help us to get around all of that. So if we go back to art and animation and we think about digital animation and the work that we do in the computer, I'm sure you'll probably recognize the image on the lower right, which is Andy's bedroom from Toy Story. How important is it for those of us who work in the computer to pay attention to and to learn the skills of traditional observational painting and drawing? It is 100% important. Poder des computadores es muy limitado sin esto otro conocimiento de observar, de dibujar en vivo. Y necesitamos conocimiento de la historia de artes plásticas y diseño y todo eso. At the beginning of the development, the visual development for Toy Story, the Pixar team knew they had to present heaven and hell. Andy's bedroom was heaven. Sid's bedroom was hell. So they wanted to choose 2 signature artists that represented, in the popular taste, these visions of a beautiful world or a horrible world or a scary world. So they chose 2 particular artists to represent these 2 extremes. You can see how the golden light and the purple shadows are taken from this illustration by a very famous commercial illustrator in America called Maxfield Parrish. And you can see just how much work the Pixar team put into duplicating his golden hour aesthetic. And golden hour is the 60-minute period before the sun sets, when the angle of the sun's rays hitting the Earth's atmosphere creates a warmth and a softness in the light that cinematographers and illustrators and painters love. But for the Pixar team to be able to communicate with one another and with their bosses at Disney about how this was going to look, they needed to talk in terms of not just the future of animation and the digital toolkits, but the history of art and the traditional techniques. So again, in this image from Toy Story 2, you see the purple in the shadows taken from Maxfield Parrish. What was the signature artist, can you imagine, for Sid's room? Okay, well, everything from the color of the carpet, from the color of the rug, is taken from the work of Hieronymus Bosch, and in particular from the Garden of Earthly Delights triptych that's in the Prado Museum in Madrid. Even the broken up, surreal, nightmare rearranged toys come from Hieronymus Bosch's imagination. Do we need to know and respect and pay attention to the history, not just of our medium of movies and animation, but to the history of painting and design? Yes, we do. And we need to have that knowledge of names, dates, schools of design, periods of development. So please, while you are studying and all the time that you are working, maintain an interest in everything that is happening in Chile, in other parts of Latin America, in Asia, in China, in Europe, and notice any of the things that are strengths in other people's work that you could incorporate or learn from in the work that you yourselves create. So here we see across the centuries the influence of artists like Hieronymus Bosch and Maxfield Parrish on contemporary computer animation. In the use of color that we have in movie making, we are also following a long historical tradition which relates the chosen colors to the characters and the trajectory of the narrative. This began in Europe and the Netherlands in the tradition of Bible story paintings. So the character in the Bible who is about to plant a kiss on Jesus' cheek in the Garden of Gethsemane is Judas Iscariot. And he is not a nice guy. He is the biggest villain in Christian history. And in every single painting by every single artist from this period, he is pictured in yellow. It is the color of cowardice, the color of betrayal. And in this picture of the Last Supper, he is also seen with the sack on his back for the 60 pieces of silver from the Romans for betraying Jesus. All the other disciples are on the same side of the table as Jesus. Judas is on the other side. In this image, again, and you know, this, I should take offense at this because Judas usually has red hair as well and very white skin. So what can I say? But here he is again on the other side of the table from Jesus in this narrative. And just in case you're not sure that the guy in the gold is Judas in this one, he's got Satan behind him holding onto his shoulder. How do movie and animation designers incorporate these kind of design and color choices into the work that they do? Well, if we think of yellow as the color of cowardice, in the original West Side Story directed by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins, when the two gangs are making fun of one another, the Jet gang members taunt the sharks using yellow fruit. And then the shark leader is positioned in front of a yellow door. This is not accidental. This is not random. The people who make these films carry large tins of paint and they color code according to the notes of the art director and the production design team. And if a building or a car or a boat is not the color they need it for the film, they paint it that color before they actually act out the scene. Later on, as the sharks are making fun of the jets, they pour paint on them and they pour yellow paint on them for exactly the same reason that yellow paint was used to create the costume for Judas Iscariot. There are universal transcultural associations with the primary colors. Green is associated with photosynthesis and nature. Red is associated with blood and violence and lust. Blue is associated with the sky and with heaven. That it remains true whether you're in China, Australia, or Norway. And here again, we see the use of yellow in the building to underpin the idea of the cowardice of these gang members. One of the things that we have available to us when we're designing color for animation is contrast. Here we see the color script for the opening sequence and then for the introduction to the human camp from Tarzan. And this is created by an artist called Dan Cooper, an amazing designer who also worked on Zootopia, Treasure Planet. And you can see how important it is to emphasize the fiery color of the burning ship by having this warm blue midnight moonlit blue around about the sinking ship. The central idea for light in Tarzan was that light equals danger. So the gorillas live in the safety of the lower part of the jungle on the jungle floor far below the canopy. And when the human intruders arrive, they cut through the bamboo and let in light, and they let in danger. And the color again of, because they ultimately betray Tarzan, the color for their costumes was changed from the white that was seen in the development artwork through to the key costume color for Clayton, Porter, and Jane of yellow. These beautiful oil paintings, life-size oil paintings by the artist John Watkiss, were used as concept art and development artwork. And as I left my office each morning, I would see several of John's paintings. And when we actually see Clayton arrive, he cuts through the bamboo, lets in the light, and we see this intense blast of yellow coming into the gorilla's safe space. This is psychology that we borrow from ancient times, but which we see in the modern context, often used in the packaging, particularly of food. In North America and in Europe, we eat a lot of baked beans. And the tin, the label on the tin is usually this blue-green color because it is the opposite on the color wheel from the color of the sauce. If the label was red, the sauce would look unappetizing because it would be not as red as the label. But if we put the opposite color on the color wheel on the label, then when you open the tin, this looks really appetizing, even though it's mainly water, sugar, and food dye. In his book, Todd Paulson, who published all the notes made in his career by Maurice Noble, who was the layout artist who worked with Chuck Jones, there are many of these color diagrams that you see on the left that can help you understand the power and the importance of clever and appropriate and relevant color choices. In Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, Tippi Hedren's costume is the same kind of neutral gray-green because it leads us to have a more shocking experience of the bright red of the blood. In The Heat of the Night, we see the art director and the production design and the set dressing crew using this neutral green in the areas behind his character of Officer Tibbs and the very fiery blood red color of the fire extinguisher for exactly the same kind of contrast. So this works in animation, it works in fine art, it works in advertising, it works in live action. It's all equally important. For some reason, here we go. We can see the highlights here if we reduce everything down to black and white. Okay. These are more of the life-size oil paintings that John Watkiss created, very much in the style of the English painter John Singer Sargent. And this is something I would encourage you to do when you're working on a project. Don't only have your artwork in virtual form on your desktop or on a hard drive. Put artwork on the walls around you so that you begin to live and experience and believe in the world that you're creating. Beautiful pastel drawings, this time on wrapping paper, long before the ultimate character designs were finalized. This is all John Watkiss development artwork for Tarzan. Absolutely stunning. Do original, traditional fine art techniques still matter? Yes, they do. Does observational drawing matter? Yes, it does. Does anatomy, perspective? Yeah, the answer is yes to all these questions. Draw, 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 all the time, draw. One of the areas in which observational drawing is particularly important is in storyboarding, of course, because you're creating a visual narrative that allows the words to jump off of the page and arrive on the screen as an image. These are from the beginning where Carla discovers the baby in the treehouse. And one of the things that really impressed me the first time that I got the chance to go to one of the story conferences on Tarzan was that if there is a problem or if there is an idea for how things can be improved, nobody cares who makes the suggestion for the improvement. And in this instance, I felt that although the storyboarding was clever here, the idea of reintroducing all of the little baby baboons at the moment, how many panels do you need to tell the story? This is one of the big questions that we have to answer with the storyboard and the animatic. And how can we make this better? This is the expression they use in Disney. When the work arrives in our department, how can we plus this? How can we make it better? And I thought it was really spoiling the impact of the moment where Jane sees Tarzan's face for the first time. Originally, the storyboard crew created a second series of gags where when the rain started, the baboons came back and they used Jane as a little bridge. And it was a funny idea, but it took up time, it would be expensive to animate, and it took away attention from this moment, which is the really important moment, which is where she sees his face and she screams. So in the final film, all of these other panels were taken out, but you need all that artwork on the wall to see what is working and what doesn't work, and to see how it's possible to plus the original idea. Who gets to make suggestions? Anybody. It doesn't have to be the director or the writer or the head of the story department. Anyone who is in the room at the time who sees something that could be better, funnier, scarier, they're allowed to say, and that influences the artists in their creation of additional drawings. This is one of the few scenes that I did special effects animation on. So they ran out of artists. I was the artistic coordinator on Tarzan, so my role was not usually to animate, but in this case, they needed the lightning flashes on Tarzan's body when he lands after Clayton has died. And again, through all of the work that I did all those years ago in art school, going to figure drawing classes every day, I could create, using pencil, the areas that would appear as light on his body, also following the muscle diagrams that we had of the character of Tarzan. All through the history of movie making, all through the history in particular of science fiction movie making, the cross-cultural influences have been very, very clear and very important. Growing up in Scotland, it was possible sometimes to think that I'd been born in the wrong place and that all the really interesting work was happening in cinema in the United States. I've had similar reactions and stories from the students I work with here in Mexico, that people want to leave Mexico and go to Europe or go to Japan or go to Canada to work. And people are often very tuned out of their own culture and what it has to offer. The interesting thing is that Miyazaki is very interested in Britain and Europe and the Mediterranean for his environments. And these designers, for Fritz Lang's Metropolis and later on for the very first Blade Runner by Ridley Scott, where do you think they went to get their inspiration for these futuristic ziggurats? I wonder. So this particular corner of the world in Latin, Southern, Central, South America is full of monumental architecture and decorative work that has had a profound influence on cinema ever since the silent era. So this is a movie by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger called A Matter of Life and Death. And you can see where they got this idea for the eternal staircase connecting the afterlife to the present world. These are the first drawings I did when I came to Mexico in a little moleskin book with a little biro. I loved how the cables were wrapped around the trees outside my hotel window. I loved all the possibilities that there were for the mysterious carvings on the outside of the buildings in the Condesa neighborhood in Mexico. And I scanned in the drawings and played around with them in Photoshop to see what different lighting effects would have. But my time spent, the first team of students that I worked with at Sci Mexico, I persuaded them to go out and draw the neighborhood surrounding the campus, because most of them arrive and leave the campus with their mobile phones in their hands, and they're so busy looking at their cell phones, they're not looking at the world around them. But the world around us is endlessly fascinating. This little key shop, which is 2 blocks from the campus, has been in this family for 5 generations, and that airplane is made from parts of an old washing machine by the owner's great-grandfather. But we need to keep our eyes and ears open to everything that's happening in our world. This is a stop-motion animated feature film by a Norwegian friend of mine called Mats Grorud, and it tells the story of Palestinian refugees living in a refugee camp in Lebanon. And he came to the Guadalajara Film Festival in 2019 and talked to the students about the portrayal of war and violence and all of these very serious themes using puppets and hand-drawn animation. And they questioned his choice of medium, and he defended his choice, saying, when we use animation, we leave the door to the audience's heart open, because audiences around the world see a great deal of very realistic, very graphic live action tragedy, violence, and dystopian events. And people become overwhelmed and they become numb to the message itself. But animation still has that magical power, that transformative power to take important narrative and put it in a form that people will understand, respond to, and never forget. Preguntas.
Wow, bravo. Amazing journey. That's super. Yeah, there's a lot of people with the hands here.
Ajá.
Yo tengo otra, de una que quería acordarse tanto. Ya, mi pregunta relacionada. Es muy importante que la sombra y la animación tengan una correlación para mantener estética en el ambiente.
In Roger Rabbit, the correspondence between the lighting and the environment, yes?
Yes,
Yeah,
sí.
we had to copy that on every frame from the photographs of the live action. Does that answer your question?
¿Entendió, Matías?
Yes.
¿Sí?
Yes, really.
Muy bien, muy bien. Chicos, aquí.
Gracias, Matías.
Elías.
You're welcome.
No, si quiere, Ana, desde ahí. Elías want to ask you something.
Elías, hola, Elías, ¿qué tal?
Bueno, está bien, venga. Me escuche mejor.
Hi, Elias. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Me and classmates have 3 questions, if that's fine. The first one is about the materials you used in Tarzan. I mean, and you said you were a painter and that you got contract. Did you use like watercolors for the backgrounds or any special?
So my role on Tarzan, I was the artistic coordinator. So by that time, I had worked on another movie called Space Jam, and I had spent several years going around the world training people how to use one of the early animation software packages called Animo. And that software package had been bought by DreamWorks to make Prince of Egypt, by Warner Brothers to make Space Jam. So most of my work on Tarzan was not artistic, although occasionally I would join the team and work when they ran out of time or ran out of people, because they knew that I had those skills as well. But I wasn't involved in the background painting, but they used a really extraordinary brand new process called Deep Canvas, which allowed the painters for the 3-dimensional environments to position paint strokes in the 3-dimensional space. Previously, you would have had to create a flat roadkill painting and wrap that around the geometry of the trees. But this allowed them to move 3D wireframe geometry and paint onto it as though it was a physical object. So digital paint was used, but they also used traditional acrylic paints for most of the backgrounds. There are reasons why oil and watercolor are not always suitable. Watercolor was brought back into the Disney background department on Lilo and Stitch, but the background supervisor, Doug Ball, was done using acrylic paint, and it was done on watercolor paper and on specially prepared board. But the color had to be matched in the grading process and in post-production with what was happening in the digital environment so that the color scheme was the same. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. For the second question, we have a few first students, so we were wondering if you have any advice for us, any hardship we might find in the future?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I would really recommend is that you guys learn how to work in support of one another and how to be a lot of the conversations, particularly in social media, lead us to believe that what really matters is being ambitious, and what matters is having lots of people on social media giving you corazón, 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 telling you how clever you are and how wonderful your work is and all this kind of stuff. None of that means shit if you're not nice to one another. So pardon my language, but what matters most in life and what matters most in the animation industry is to be kind to one another. I would also recommend that you guys pay attention to the financial, legal, and organizational and business history of these industries. I'm not suggesting that you guys as creative or technical, as people with creative or technical skills should look after the contracts or the financial side, but you need to be working and learning with people who understand and respect that side of the work. Because otherwise, as artists and technicians, you will be vulnerable to and at the mercy of the people who do understand how the money moves around the industry. I worked on Roger Rabbit, I worked on Space Jam, I worked on Tarzan. Are those movies still making money? Yes, they are. Do I see any of that money? No, I don't. Why? Because my contract was drawn up by Disney and by the local IATSE 839 Cartoonists Union. I have a friend who is a modeler in 3D, but also a voice artist, and he's a member of the Screen Actors Guild. And you'll probably have seen that there's a Writers Guild of America strike happening at the moment over issues relating to artificial intelligence and all kinds of other things. He still gets paid for voice acting work that he did on The Emperor's New Groove because his contract entitles him to a percentage of the continuing profits of the movie. You don't have to build in Chile or here in Mexico a copy of everything that is wrong with the industry in America or wrong with the industry in Japan or Korea. You will have heard stories of people working 18 hours a day and sleeping under their desks. If you are working 18 hours a day, that means you are working for somebody who can't count, who doesn't care about you. It's that simple. You want to make sure that you work with and for people who can count and who do care about you, and you need to care about them as well. I would really encourage your generation to move away from the predatory model that we have in the entertainment industries of the lion and the antelope. I am going to Annecy, where Mexico this year will be the featured country. At all these events, you have two distinct groups of people. You have creative people who have been working on ideas for years going, I hope we find somebody to give us the money to make this project. And then you have another group of people going, I hope we manage to find some creative talent that we can exploit. That is a broken, horrible, nasty model. El dinero en las nuestras industrias no es en el trabajo, es en propiedad intelectual. Y es importante crear narrativas, personajes, mundos originales, auténticos de Latam, de Chile, de Mexico. I've been doing sketchbook review for 4.5 years now at Pixelatl events. And in all that time, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of students, and I've seen fewer than 6 observational sketchbooks. because I see fan art, I see copies of anime, I see copies of manga, it's okay to copy good artwork and learn from the techniques. It is a total waste of time to copy bad artwork and learn nothing. And a lot of television animation artwork is bad art. And there's a lot of concept art out there at the moment that is really, really bad work. But if you go onto social media, you would think these people were geniuses because people talk about them in such high terms. But these are not techniques or styles that are going to last. And what I try to encourage people to do is do exactly what I did. Develop the skills that never go out of fashion. The problem with cool is the definition of cool is it's cool this week and it won't be cool next week. And I think it's important to remember that people are still buying and enjoying the original Disney Pinocchio, which is 80 years old. And I'm not so sure that in 80 years' time, too many people are going to be watching BoJack Horseman. And I really love Michael Hollingsworth and I really love that show, but it is not artwork at the level of Leonardo da Vinci or Kathy Kollwitz, or so that would be the other thing. And the other thing I would say is, even though this question is coming from one of the guys in the audience, we have in Mexico Mujeres en el Mundo de Animación Mexico. And we have a lot of talk about how important it is for there to be more women directors, more women writers, more women animators. That is very important. But I'll tell you something, that's not going to happen unless we have more men who want to take the children to school, clean the house and cook the food, because women have been doing that without pay or recognition for thousands of years. And if we were in Norway, you would have childcare and you would have paternity leave. But this is Latin America and we don't have those things. So you hear about a lot of young people saying, I'm not going to have a family or I'm not going to have kids because I won't have time because I'm going to put my time into my career. Please build an industry in Chile that is family friendly, because it doesn't matter what your gender or sexual orientation is. It's important to bring new generations into existence. Otherwise, why are we telling stories and why are we making films? So be kind, pay attention to the business side, think about the future, and don't sacrifice your life for your skills and your art. Make the two exist in a balance. That would be my advice.
Excellent. Yeah. And the last one is
Yes.
Of the other projects, which
Matías, denos un segundo que Elías quiere hacer la última pregunta.
Okay.
Out of all your production, which one do you think was the hardest?
The hardest was Space Jam.
Space Jam.
Space Jam was a living nightmare for a year and a half. It was just, there are not enough hours in the day to tell you everything that went wrong on Space Jam. It was a complete waking nightmare. But don't quote me on that.
I can imagine.
It was. I'm very, very glad that I worked on it, and I met lots of wonderful people, and I learned extraordinary things. But mostly, I learned how not to make a movie. It was. Gracias.
Juan Contreras is asking, what have you heard about Chilean art or animation?
Juan, hola, Juan Contreras, ¿qué tal? So I was lucky enough to meet Gabriel Osoro and the Punk Robot guys when they came to an event here in Guadalajara. Chile, through Bear Story, has the first Latin American Academy Award. Am I right? Yes?
Yep.
You have the most extraordinary festival in Chile Monos. You have wonderful teachers like Luis and wonderful facilities like what you have in the digital art course that you're on. But the answer really is, I would love to know much more about Chilean art and animation. And I rely on you guys to bring that to my attention and to tell me, guide me what I need to be paying attention to and what I need to be looking at and being inspired by.
Your man spent so many years doing Nahuel, Germán Acuña.
Yes.
Yes.
And El Libro Mágico. Yeah.
Mágico, yes. Yeah. Amazing animation and stuff.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah. Matías, su pregunta.
Hola, Matías.
Hola, hi, Mr. MacLean.
Please call me Fraser. If you call me Mr. MacLean, it's like I'm being arrested or taken to the insurance office. Or
well, okay. ¿Cómo se llama? Así, ¿cómo es trabajar con tantas licencias relacionadas a la cultura pop que que estén en un mismo mundo, coexistiendo unos con otros? O sea, por ejemplo, está Mickey Mouse y Bugs Bunny y están otras caricaturas. ¿Era pedir licencia a la otra empresa para que estuvieran en la película?
I'm not sure. Luis, can you translate for me? I'm not sure I'm following this time.
Was to put together all these different characters like Bugs Bunny and Mouse.
In Roger
Rabbit. Yeah, and Daffy Duck and all that, you know.
I actually have, this is from one of the adverts that we did at Passion Pictures. There was an artist called Bog McKnight who was brought over to animate Mickey Mouse, and he was having nightmares that he was turning into Mickey Mouse. So I still have his sketch. The major problem, Matthias, was a legal problem because in the scene where Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse are falling, Warner Brothers and Disney insisted that they have exactly the same number of frames in the movie for the two characters. So between the Fleischer Studios, the Walter Lantz Studios, MGM Cartoons, the creation of Toontown for Roger Rabbit was a legal nightmare. But and so was putting my book together, because you had to get permissions from all the different legal departments and all the different studios. But in practical terms, in the drawing terms, it's the same challenge. So it wasn't necessarily too difficult for the artists to work in the different studio styles, but for the legal department, it was a big challenge.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah.
Una última pregunta ya para finalizar. ¿Cómo era? Sí, ya me acordé. Es corta, profe, pero es la última que tengo y ya con eso ya finalizar con este. Mi última pregunta es, ¿usted ha visto, usted qué opina de Chip y Dale al rescate, esta película que es como de esencia secuela de Roger Rabbit?
The idea of the sequel to Roger Rabbit.
Yes, Chip y Dale al rescate.
Well, recently they did the Chip and Dale movie, where they tried to bring together the different types of animation and live action, and I don't know that they will ever agree on, because Gary K. Wolf, the guy who created the character, Robert Zemeckis, Steven Spielberg, Disney, there have been many changes. And there were some tests to see if they could do a 3D computer animated Roger Rabbit, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the original idea, which was that the cells existed and that the characters were made of paint. So I don't know that would necessarily work. I think it was a movie that worked best on its own. If there's going to be a sequel, I wish everybody the best of luck in making a good story and making a good movie, but I don't think the world really needs all of these sequels. I think that we have room for original ideas from you guys, repeating ideas that were created by people my age and older. Screw that. I think I'm more interested in the future. I'm more interested in what you guys create. So rather than make a sequel to Roger Rabbit, make a Chilean animated movie that reaches and entertains as many people as Roger Rabbit.
Yeah. Fraser, do we have time for 2 more questions?
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, Cheul was first. Okay, Cheul. No, lo estamos grabando. Grave.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome,
Fraser.
Matthias.
Oh, yes.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, Mr. Fraser.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for coming. It's an honor and a pleasure to meet you. And seeing all your trajectory and professional agenda is really an impressive artwork, and I would really like to congratulate you for that. And
Gracias.
de nada.
Nada.
Second of all, I would like to talk about the artificial intelligence and the threat that is coming for our industry and our advantage in the creating of films and shorts and all that stuff. I want to know your opinion about it. Is a threat or is a compliment, like it was the animation in your time, I think?
That's a really important and really interesting question, and I will give you my best possible answer. My father, during World War II, was a radar mechanic. And this was at the time when radar didn't even have a name. It was a new technology. So he trained in radio and he trained in radar, and he was ground crew in North Africa during World War II with the Royal Air Force. My father was also, after he went into journalism in 1951, he was one of Scotland's first television presenters. Do you want to know how terrified the world was of television? Do you want to know how terrified the world was in the 1800s of photography? The world always does exactly what it's doing now in reaction to a new technology like artificial intelligence. I'm going to say a little bit more, but when I moved, when the trades unions that controlled the print industry, when you bought a book or a newspaper up until the 1980s, every single letter and every single punctuation point on every single page was hand positioned as a miniature piece of metal in a frame that then went onto a printing press. And there were millions, literally millions of people around the world who worked in this movable type print industry. When computer technology came along, one of the first things that it was capable of doing was typesetting. And that meant that all of those people would either need to retrain or find other work. And what happened in the newspaper industry where my father was working is the trade unions went, we are not going to allow this to happen. We are not going to allow, we are going to protect our members, and they are not going to be put out of a job. What resulted was my father nearly had a nervous breakdown because the unions would destroy the work that he and his team had done out of trying to make a point about how resistant they were to this new technology. And Scotland lost its print, publishing, and journalism industries, which had taken centuries to build up, and they were gone in under 5 years. And they went to the Philippines and Asia and all the places where these new technologies were embraced. So my father said, I don't care if you are a fashion designer, I don't care if you're a photographer, I don't care if you're if you see a change in technology, reach out and embrace it, because there are only two things that will happen. Either the wave, you learn to ride the wave, or the wave will go over your head. Many of the people that I see and hear taking part in these social media screaming matches about artificial intelligence are people who are terrified that it's going to take away their work as concept artists. Well, of course it will. If your idea of concept art is photo bashing, then of course you're going to be out of a job. And none of the people who used to do ink and paint in the days before the computers digitized ink and paint would ever go back to painting cells, because it was so exhausting and so difficult and so time consuming and so expensive. So when we were making those television commercials with all of the compositing being done digitally, I realized that was the point at which this new computer technology was coming into my industry. And I put down my pencils and paper, and I deliberately went out to look for work in the digital sector. And I got hired by Cambridge Animation Systems because they needed somebody who understood the animation industry and who was a complete idiot with computers. Until the age of 32 in 1993, the only computers I had ever interacted with were the computers that gave me my money at the bank and the word processors that I used. I had no idea how to operate a mouse or a keyboard, none of that. I learned that in my 30s. I didn't have an email address till I was 32. I didn't have a cell phone till I was nearly 40. And you guys are in an industry that only exists because of technology. So you cannot go to war with the technology as it develops and as it shifts. You can if you want to, but the technology is going to win. I can tell you this for a fact, because it has won in every other sphere of human endeavor and human creativity. Are there people out there who are trying to use this technology for their own ends to make themselves richer without having to employ so many people? Yes, because that is the model on which free market capitalism is based. And if you want to reinvent the world's entire financial and economic system, I wish you luck, but it's not going to be easy to do that and have a career in animation at the same time. I would encourage everybody to calm down and read the history. The thing that worries me most about artificial intelligence is not how movie companies use it, it's how governments use it. Because I think that where we are vulnerable, a machine is never going to create art, because a machine cannot experience pain. Art comes through a sentient reaction to the human experience. It doesn't come through being clever or adding up numbers or whatever. There are forms of artistic expression that rely on those toolkits and those techniques, but art in its true sense, like a song or a movie or a stage play, ultimately, the reason I go out as many nights as possible to draw musicians playing blues, jazz, DJ sets, whatever, here in Guadalajara, is I would rather be with real people, experiencing their talent, their compassion, their intelligence, and learning from their experience of the world. I have been completely preoccupied with technology and computers and machines for too many years. And I am really worried that for so many people in your generation, this is something that never leaves your hand. What I would say is, don't get so upset about artificial intelligence and arguing with people and being on TikTok, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Switch this off and go out and live and record what you see, hear, experience, feel with a pencil and a paper or with brush or pen. You don't have to be using technology all the time. And in most contexts where people are being hired, one of the things that will really decide whether or not as an artist you will get a job is whether or not you have a personal sketchbook of observational work, not fan art, not AI prompting, not anything. What did you see last night, and did you draw what you saw? Let me hold on just a second. I don't have my sketchbooks here because I'm getting stuff framed. I'll be right back.
Please
Hold on.
show it. Yes.
Yeah, hold on.
We'll be here. No está clara la respuesta. En el fondo todo siempre cambia y la mega respuesta. Está bien, ¿no?
We are having an exhibition starting next week of 84 sketches that I've done. I had another exhibition last week. Every single drawing is being sold to raise money for a foundation that provides cancer treatment for people in Mexico who don't have health insurance. So I go I go out with this. This is an office pen, and I go out with this and I draw people playing music, I draw people listening to music. These sketchbooks have all been torn apart because I'm framing so many of the drawings to sell in the exhibition. This is somebody's left foot. I draw what's in front of me. I draw all the time, whether people are keeping still or whether they're moving around a lot. This guy you can see is moving, so he's got 4 hands and 2 heads. These people are playing traditional Balkan music, although they're Mexican. I'm out. This is in a bar that's too dark to see the musicians, so I had to draw the glass in front of me, and all of that is done with a biro. And am I going to make that into a movie? No. Is anybody from Netflix going to give me lots of money to do something with it? No. Do I care? No. Because what matters is like practicing your scales as a musician, keeping your muscles flexible as a dancer or as a track and field athlete. What we are doing is all about observation. And machines, they can do surveillance, but they can't do observation, and they can't feel, and they can't think. And I think the most important thing is the word artificial. And remember, we have human intelligence, and after all these millions of years, we still don't know what to do with that. And most of us don't use the intelligence that we've got. So does it present a threat? Yeah, of course it does. But that requires us to rise up and do something about it, not to sit and complain. So that's my thoughts on artificial intelligence.
Bravo. Antonio
Next question.
Sánchez quiere una pregunta.
Hello, Fraser.
Hi, Antonio, how are you?
Hi. I'm very good. I only have one question for you. In your work experience, what is the most important thing for the animators or animators?
For character animators.
Yeah.
Entonces, ¿es imposible crear movimiento para personajes animados para películas o para videojuegos sin observar movimiento en vivo y capturar con una pluma, con un lápiz, si usamos iPhones or photographs? A photo is a great, perfect record of a single moment in time. But animation is all about movement in space. And if you're going to be a character animator, pay attention also to environments and to architecture and to lighting. It's not just about the characters and the bipeds and the quadrupeds. But that was why I did the book about layout, because everybody, when I started teaching 23 years ago, wanted to be a character animator. Well, that's like trying to have an orchestra with only violins. I wish you luck. The important thing as a character animator is to remember that you're not the most important person in the building. You are one of a lot of different important people. But the mistake that Disney made was to put the character animators on a pedestal to the point where when we were working on Tarzan, there were young people coming out of CalArts into character animation positions and treating me like a waiter. I was getting the kind of hoven kind of thing. And I'm like, excuse me? Because so to be a character animator or to be any kind of animation artist, what is important is observation and humility. So remember that, you don't just transform into some kind of superhero power genius with a kind of shamanistic connection to a higher plane just because you're animating the characters. Love what you do and base what you do on observation of people, faces, bodies, movement, performance. But don't just draw from the nude and don't just draw in a single position. Draw while people are moving. Otherwise, you'll never be able to bring movement into what you're doing if you're not sketching movement. There's a wonderful page of sketches by Leonardo da Vinci of a cat playing on a floor. You try drawing a cat and telling a cat to sit still, it won't. But he managed it, and you can too. So I would say the most important thing is observation, but also just to remember that you're you're part of a team. It's not everybody else in the building to support your skill as a character animator. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And the last question, Fraser, to Citri. Maite here, she's the producer of her group.
Hi there.
She's and she's producing, you know, the short film for the last year, okay? And she's asked, what was your perception about the production or producing these huge films? You know, the role.
That's a very, very important question. So we are working at the moment. I have just terminated. I've finished working with Sci Mexico. I worked with them as part of the online teaching team for 3 years. I'm starting work with Escuela Escena in Ciudad de Mexico in August when I get back from Europe. And part of the first effort that we're making is to create seminars based on the experience of producers in all the different successful markets. I didn't speak to or understand the pressures on producers until I worked on Space Jam and I met Ron Tipp and Alison Abati, who were the two producers. Without good producers, without good production managers, without good lawyers, the rest of us don't have a job. And one of the things in my generation that was so wrong and so dysfunctional was that the culture grew up where people in London in the animation industry would go and drink beer on a Friday night. And in one corner of the bar, you would have all the artists and all the animators pointing across the room at all the producers and the accountants and the managers and going, these people have no soul. These people are bean counters. These people are suits. We are the artists. We are the important ones. And then if you went to the other side of the room and you listened to what the producers were saying, again, these artists, they turn up late. They can't get stuff done by a deadline. They go out and get drunk. They smoke weed. They're like, you know, they're just. And then in the 1990s, when the computer revolution happened, the first time that these two people came together, they came together to be suspicious of and hateful towards all of these computer programmers who came into their world and were not welcome. So we had 3 separate warring tribes in my generation. And I don't want you guys to be at war with one another. I'm going to be visiting the Film Academy in Ludwigsburg, just outside Stuttgart, in 2 weeks' time. And the reason I am going there is that one of the reactions they had to the Fuga de Talento from Germany was they created a curriculum where under one roof, as you're doing now, one group of students learns creative skills, another group of students learns technical skills, and a third separate group learns production, resource management, legal, financial, all those skills. And what has developed is a new kind of culture where that lion and antelope predatory exploitative model is not there because everybody is part of the same family. But as with all families, you need to have mutual respect. And one of the things that Don Hahn said, we have a group that Luis can link you to on Facebook called Animation. And if you're a member of the Facebook group, you can look at all of the video recordings of conversations with Sandra Rabins, with Don Hahn, with producers for video games in Mexico, with people, as many people you can speak to. And Don Hahn, who produced Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, all these movies, one of the skills that he felt was most important was how to build and look after teams of people. And that involves an enormous amount of patience and understanding and flexibility because human beings are assholes. We're terrible. We really, really don't know how to behave. We think it's all about us all the time. And the producer is very often the person, or the producers are the people who have to do what I did as an artistic coordinator, which is get into a position between all these different groups of people and prevent them from killing one another. Not in the literal sense, but, you know, to try and make it that life is happy and tolerable. So the producer's skills matter greatly. And we need much more understanding of that, and we need much more respect for the people who fill those positions. And one of the points that Alison Abati made was she gets very tired of people saying that, oh, well, of course, you're not one of the creative people. She meant, I'm very creative. A lot of my work as a producer is intensely creative, which is creative in a different way to the people who are animating the characters or the special effects or painting the backgrounds. So thank you for being a producer, is all I can say.
Well, un aplauso, Fraser, por favor. Fraser.
A ustedes.
The camera, and to the camera, and thank you for generosity as always. Wait. This camera.
My pleasure.
Okay.
De nada.
Thank you for generosidad. Great Spanish is improving a lot since the last.
Es un poquitito mejor que antes, pero es todavía de mierda. Disculpe.
And yes, thank you so much. I would like to bring you to Chile as soon as possible. So let's pray for that to happen, okay? And have this.
I will pray
in person, okay?
Luis, can I say one last offer one last piece of advice?
I'm gonna turn students. Okay.
So I just want to offer you one last little word of advice, and this was something that occurred to me. I was doing an online class with some students in California, and again and again, one of the students would say, I will be happy if I get to work in Tokyo. I will be really happy if I get a job at Pixar. I would be really happy if I could work for Blizzard Games. And it occurred to me that they were all thinking about happiness as something that was out of reach, something that was external. That is not a healthy definition of happiness. If you are waiting to be happy, but by the time you reach a particular career goal or a particular milestone, it's always going to be out of reach. The important thing is to take happy with you wherever you go. And if you yourself are not happy, or you're depressed, or you're miserable, do something nice for somebody around you. Make something good happen, or make something positive possible for other people. And even if you remain anxious and depressed and in the midst of all your own problems, it will add something positive to the general mix. So please take happy with you. Don't think of happiness as something that you're going to reach or achieve. It's something that all of us have the capacity to generate. And even if we can't generate it for ourselves always, we can certainly find ways of making happiness possible for other people. And when you're working in teams, that's an extremely important skill.
Bien. Aplausos.